Hi everyone, it's Adam, your Field CTO here at WatchGuard, and today we're going to be talking about everything endpoint. The MITRE ATT&CK Eval results are out from 2025 for those who chose to participate, of which we were one. So we're going to deep dive into those. It's going to be an AMA, Ask Me Anything, so just feel free to, like I said, type your questions into the chat, and I'll hope to get to those throughout. Don't feel like you have to wait. If you've got questions on your mind right now, just start pumping them into that QA. And we'll get to those as soon as we can. And we've got questions for you as well as we go through this. All right, let's start from the top. What is the MITRE ATT&CK framework? A lot of you have seen this sort of weird Jeopardy board with a lot of text on it. Sometimes it shows up as heat maps. People like to think of it as, sort of this big catalog that we've been building for, over 10 years to talk about what the adversary is up to, what the bad guys, the mobsters that are building this, these cyber attack exploits, what their techniques are, what their tactics are, how this process unfolds in networks, so that we can basically share with each other some of the learnings about what attackers are using, what they're doing, and more importantly, help defenders like WatchGuard communicate to the community which stage of the attack life cycle we are finding things at, and of course getting them out of the environment. So at the top level, it's a great catalog, a great sort of wiki of what the attackers are able to do. It's good for people who are really interested in deep diving into the different techniques. And of course, the whole point of this is to try to measure what it is that you're able to find and stop in your environment. So it exists, like we talk about, in a very different mindset. So there's a lot of different ways that you can think of cybersecurity. You can think of it from a proactive sort of vulnerability. Let's get rid of this. Let's patch this. Let's harden this, reducing your attack surface type of thing. That's not what MITRE's for. MITRE assumes a sort of breach mindset. There are always attackers at some stage of a life cycle inside your environment, and your software that's based on blue team, based on defending you, is supposed to find them in the environment and get them out, right? Detect and respond. And we're going to have a lot of nomenclature and words here that we're going to start throwing around when it comes to interpreting the results. So it's really important to understand that MITRE's focus is around detecting adversaries that are already in your environment and getting them out. It's not about hardening and battening down the hatches and getting proactive. The origins of this is that basically it was an internal catalog at the MITRE organization in the Fort Meade labs that are in Virginia, and then they have some offices in Bedford, Massachusetts, that basically were the sort of research project that was internal for a while. And then obviously it was publicly released for everybody to sort of consume it, communicate it. You can go to the MITRE website and read all about it. And that was something that's been evolving almost twice a year. They get sort of major updates to the framework in terms of new stuff the attacker is doing, new detection techniques to find out what that is, new analysis to build into your detection tools, and then of course mitigations, which are ways that you could harden your systems against that. So that's really what the story behind this framework really is. And so the framework, which is a big word for catalog, right, includes a couple of different matrices, a couple of different rows and columns that are trying to focus on very specific areas of the enterprise. So like if you think about the MITRE ATT&CK framework, there's one for enterprise, there's one for ICS, right? Your type of SCADA sort of industrial control systems. They also have one that's built for AI now called Atlas, right? And so it just helps sort of organize what we're talking about. It sort of started with Windows. Windows is of course still one of the top attack surfaces out there. And so this is probably the more mature of their frameworks, is the enterprise framework for Windows. But they started releasing more and more and more detections and mitigations and things for Mac, Linux, AWS, Microsoft clouds like Azure. And so you can see the enterprise framework sort of breaking out into basically everywhere a hybrid IT sort of operates to know what's going on there. It doesn't cover tools. So it's not like if there's an exploit on your firewall, there's not really, catalog for like security tools and how to break into them. It's more making sure the IT environment is what we're cataloging. And so security tools can be kind of in the middle there, explaining how those breaches are working inside those environments. For an idea of the scale of the project, right? So there are sort of 14 columns, or think of them as stages in the attack life cycles. What we'll get to is called steps, tactics that are part of the eval, which is separate. And there's also a bunch of techniques, and there are sub-techniques. So, a technique are those little squares that you kind of see on the right, and the sub-technique can be, different variations or different steps or different iterations of what that technique could look like. So in total, when they try to illustrate the point, even though there are 216 techniques, 475 sub-techniques in the latest version, version 18 of the enterprise framework, the idea is that there's also a number of detections, right? So there's a number of like almost rules or policies they can almost recommend to you as well to try to find out how those techniques and sub-techniques are working. There's also analytics. So there's the idea of a detection, how to create a rule that alerts you to something, and then an analysis, right? Something like a search. So a combination of logs and different things that you might be able to look for in AWS to find out if somebody's stealing credentials from one of your databases or something like that. And so there's this concept that, this is a constantly evolving framework. It is supported by MITRE. There's a lot of different contributors, but it's mostly used in what's called purple teaming, which is like a heads up test where, let's call it security defender and the offensive sort of pen tester are kind of cards on the table explaining to each other what they're doing and sort of reading out the results almost in real time, right? And so this also helps, educate and train teams, right? Incident responders and tabletop exercises are almost always based on some components of the MITRE framework to simulate breaches, to simulate an attacker in the environment, right? So we used to think of it as penetration testing. How can you get in here? And now we're sort of saying, okay, if we assume they're in there, let's see how fast we can find them and get them out, which is sort of the new way of thinking. Now, of course, we're here today to talk about the evaluation. What did we evaluate? What's this, test? So obviously, if you think about all those numbers, all those techniques and sub-techniques and 645 different detections and a million different ways to do analysis, and there's, Windows, Linux, Mac, AWS, Azure, Google, ICS frameworks, there's a lot that we could evaluate as vendors between the security technology that we make and, of course, the IT infrastructure and different attack methods that you can kind of switch into combination. So it's not an evaluation in its entirety of the whole framework, right? You are not looking at every single different MITRE attack stage, every single technique, sub-technique. There is going to be a random selection every year in the MITRE evaluation process, an annual test that will show you basically a handful of what attackers might be doing in the wild, collect a few of those, maybe 40, 50 steps of what the attacker is doing. And then basically the evaluation is, what did you see? Like, what did you alert or log, right? And then what did you block, right? So detected and protected. Could you see what the attacker's actions were? And could you stop them? Protected. Two different runs of the test, right? And we'll explain exactly how the test unfolds and our exact results as we go through this. But keep in mind that it's there to sort of take a sampling of a real world attacker scenario and give you kind of end-to-end one way through the cycle, initial access, maybe all the way to impact or encryption, and see how the security product lights up for alerts and how they block those attack stages distinctly, right? The test runs in 2 rounds. First round is what's called the baseline run. That's basically you get to offer as a vendor a sort of set of configuration settings, and then they give you another pass to alter a configuration setting that maybe you would do to emulate what you might have in production, because we don't just have our product sitting there with one policy and no changes possible. So they give you an opportunity to tune it once to adjust for these things. This helps because as you think of our amazing features in the product, if you were to turn on, let's say, the zero trust application service in blocking mode, you wouldn't be able to detect everything because you'd start blocking the attacker and quarantining them right away, right? So the attack, the setup is there so that we can try to maximize what we can showcase for the product in terms of its ability to label the detections. But then also there's a second round where we can say, okay, run each one of these attack scenarios now with the protection on and block it. And so we get a configuration tuning in the test there. Now, the idea here is that they're giving you transparent results, right? So there's a reason to have this webinar, is that we're there to interpret for you who did not participate in the test, those who were not present in the room in the lab, to see how the product was actually being tested and what the researchers were finding and things like that. It gives the raw results on the evals.mitre.org website, right? So you can go there. It's there's no paywall. You just start clicking and you can start to see the published results, right, from us, from anybody else that chose to participate, which wasn't everybody. And so you look at the concept, it's raw data only. It's trying to explain in MITRE's terms what attack scenario ran, screenshots from the vendor about what they were able to alert, what they were able to protect, what they were able to stop, right? And so that's really what the eval kind of boils down to, is being able to dig through the raw results. This year, and of course, even last year to a certain extent, they had a little bit more insight into not just the ability for the products to alert and defend and block, but also what it took to do that, right? So the configuration's always been part of the transparency and saying, hey, this is what we actually ran the test with, this product, this configuration, but it also has the concept of the number of alerts that were generated as part of the simulation. Why is this important? Well, if you think about it, most IT operators would realize there's a lot of different logging levels to things. If you flip on debug mode to be able to troubleshoot something, you're probably going to label a lot of stuff, right? You're going to be looking at almost every transaction the operating system is doing, or the network, and that's going to be very verbose. There's going to be a lot of noise also inside that, right? Some of it's going to be every create, read, file, update, delete that you've ever done on the operating system. That's a lot of mess to look through as a technician. So you want to make sure that you are always operationalizing this and understanding what the efficiency of the product is. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. But they're also labeling the number of alerts that the vendor had in the console overall throughout the test. So you point to the system and say, this is where alerts are. And then they start counting and saying, okay, we only had to look for 40 steps. You may have taken 5,000 alerts to tell them about 40 steps. So they want to try to sort of work that into the eval as well. And now it's important to understand that we can choose the scope of the evaluation and what we put into the test, what we test at WatchGuard. So that's up to us. This year, we chose to pick our endpoint product. A lot of amazing product. I'm going to get into the platform a little later, and we can theorize on how we would have done with more of our stuff on the field. But the point is to try to educate our customers about the standalone EDR and the ability for it to stop attacks on the endpoint. And so we took the examination. We volunteered for Mac and Windows here for the endpoint, and we used the EDR technology without a lot of the extra bells and whistles and other products around it that you would have in production. Okay, so that's what the test is. That's how it was set up. Let's go a little bit through some fun history here to say, okay, well, great, they're picking tests. Is the test totally double blind? Do you guys kind of know ahead of time? Do you have weeks or months to prepare for this test? Can you sit there and sort of game the product with cool features that are really focused on a particular attack or not? And the answer is no, we can't do that. So when the test is run annually, the idea is that it's not completely blind. We don't, we obviously are participating in the test. We're sending our people to set up the product and then, help the engineers on their side read what the results are, tell them where it is. But we're not picking the test. We don't get to pick our own test. We don't vote on what test we're going to submit to. And so MITRE's job is to pick what they think are relevant attacks throughout the rounds, right? So back in 2018, they'd pick a nation state attack that they thought was good at exfiltrating data and obviously getting around lateral movement. And so as they started to evolve, you'd sort of see the attacks they select as more of like the attack of the day, right? So in 2019, right, looking at the SolarWinds breach was sort of very big that year. So the Cozy Bear APT29 a group was really the model that they chose to try to emulate in the attack life cycle, right? In 2020, I forget why, we skipped it for some reason. Could be something to do with the fact that we were at home or in masks. And then in 2021, there was large financial, sort of campaigns, Fin7, Carbonac, that was the test they chose for that year. And then in 2022, Wizard Spider, Sandstorm, big game hunting, TrickBot, which for those of you who were, chasing malware, TrickBot, CACBot were Emotet. They were big, sort of Trojans, sort of lateral movements, the things that could kind of get through SMB, which was a big vulnerability for the preceding couple of years, which still had not been fully patched by most people. And so this ability for attackers to sort of spread across the internal network and ultimately flip over to ransomware was quite successful all the way back to, I'd say, 2018 and earlier. But the idea is that was the big game of the day. Turla, which sort of demonstrated low and slow attacks. This was an important one in 2023. The reason that this was a good pivot, instead of just saying, okay, they get in fast attack ransomware, is because they started to realize that a lot of these attackers had a very long dwell time. They could stay in the environment using low and slow, living off the land, sort of pivoting away from this sort of loud and fast breach, exploits that they were using in the past. So the Turla was sort of the shift to say, well, if you had to pick up the nuance of how somebody would move through a network trying to go undetected, low and slow, these other techniques, could the vendors pick up on that? And then for the last couple of years, we've kind of been working with the premise that this was very much a focus on endpoint exploits, that when you think about the MITRE Enterprise framework, you sort of think about it on Windows, frankly, or on Linux. And so the idea for the Lockbit CLOP last 2 years was to try to say, well, if you look at the testing environment, it's got AWS and AWS databases, and it's got network technology and separation of the environment. So the attacker may be over here, not necessarily running software, but moving through configuration, moving through the hypervisor in Amazon, and doing some things that attackers would probably do today, rather than just saying, okay, like, what if we run a different kind of malware on Windows, and it jumped through a different 6 hoops. And so the idea of MITRE and ER7 is that it's more modernized for the hybrid IT environment. It does represent, I think, what a lot of people have hosted on-prem and in the cloud, and it gives you a more realistic view of what it is that these particular products are capable of finding, and not seeing just the sort of same old stale Windows exploits. All right, so into our results, and then we're going to get into a poll question here. So the results, of course, with our EDR, we're really quite proud of, right? When you think about it, while I'm proud of one feature, if there's a sort of unsung hero of the test, it is that in the protection mode, the Zero Trust Application Service blocked everything for us, so we didn't really have to use anything else, it's a great tool, as part of our arsenal. But certainly, the visibility that we had was also there. And there are some lights we'd like to shine on the fact that, not only did we, detect 100%, block 100% of the attack visibility of step detection, not only did we have the prevention to block 100% of the actions from the attacker, but we also have this concept that when you start cataloging how many alerts it took to do that, we were one of the few that had very, very few notifications as part of our incident process to explain to the analyst what it is that was going on. So they didn't have to read through tens of thousands of alerts or hundreds of alerts, right? And that friction, that idea that it would take you a lot to extract what's going on, a lot to see what the attacker's process is from our console, is something that didn't get showcased necessarily in the raw results, but I think is a great way to interpret what you're seeing from the raw results with us. So we're going to dive into that. But before we do, of course, there's a lot of vendors that pop out different, let's call them PDFs with, we're the greatest. No, they're the greatest. No, this is, in Palo Alto's case, here's last year's results because we didn't play this time, and hoping you don't notice. And so, we'd like to ask you guys a quick poll question, right? We're here to gather feedback as well, if you can provide some. So, what do you think the hardest part of using the MITRE ATT&CK eval results is? Right. And so, we prepared a couple answers for you here. But the first one is, is it hard? The hardest part interpreting what's even being measured by the test when you see 100%? Is it clear what that even means for each product, and how is there? What do you visualize there? Is that simple? B, is it comparison? I mean, you can always see different vendors. They kind of stack us together sometimes in charts. And so, is it about comparing vendors? Does it make a lot of sense for you to compare vendors? I think a lot of people make a couple of logic leaps in how they're comparing the results. Or C, is it just understanding when we talk about friction and the operational impact, when you think about both products and you think about, well, that one's really good because it told you a lot of stuff. Is it hard to understand what it would take to get the same results, let's say, from the test? So I'm hoping you guys can vote A, B, or C. Liz, maybe chime in when it's time to close the poll and we can see how everybody voted. Yeah, please let me know what you guys think about the MITRE results and interpreting those. And you can also use the QA box, by the way, to ask me any question that you want if you're curious about that. So let's talk about a little bit about the visibility test. So the visibility test, AKA don't turn on protection mode, right? So don't, we're not gloves off. We're not allowed to fight back. We have to sit there and just tell the analyst what we see with the product, with the EDR, right? So it shows basically how the elements that we've put into the test are able to label with the different MITRE taxonomy, the different attacker actions that are in there. And it may sound like, a fairly benign thing to do, like flip the logging on to 1,000 and just, throw everything in the console and hope that they can just dig in through the needle in the haystack. Well, MITRE's a little smarter than that, and they obviously fill the test with optional noise that makes it so that it does simulate a real world environment. Or if all you were doing was just logging every single thing that happens, you actually are not, given full credit, right? The idea is that they are going to label the things they did that are just normal user or operating system behavior, and they're going to put that in as what's called noise, right? So that you're not just labeling everything in the world and hoping that you get top marks, right? So in the scenario, we had Scattered Spider, a group of 20-year-olds in the UK that recently, some of which went to prison. Very cool little group that was doing a lot of different types of scams, and so they took the attack lifecycle, a sampling of what they did. Mustang Panda, group out of China that also was quite successful at deploying different types of espionage techniques, mostly against NGOs, right? So the Vatican was one of the ones that they sort of hacked, right? So they sort of picked these two as sort of the two different scenarios. You could run one in the cloud, one on Windows, and so when you think about the attack path, they took out of the 14 possible tactics, right? And there's some pre and some other things that are a little bit more difficult to sort of run in an exercise. They picked 7 malicious steps, right? You can think of those as the tactics. 28 sub-steps, right? So, maybe within credential access, there's a try to steal something from the browser, try to create, an obfuscated HTML that would click a link and we'll steal some stuff here, right? So you can see exactly those steps, steps and sub-steps inside the actual eval results. I'll walk you through those in a sec. And then the legitimate activity, things like emptying the recycling bin or zipping a file that you would just do normally. Those are the kinds of things that were considered noise, or the 2 steps that were considered legitimate activity, aka noise, right? And so when you look at the results, the idea is that the detection categories are none, right? Which is nice. You get none as a label as a vendor if, let's say, and that's a good thing if you're running a legitimate activity and we didn't say anything about it, right? Where we didn't say user, emptied recycling bin, look at this, right? So none is good in some cases. General, of course, is where we sort of labeled it, but we didn't use the MITRE type of language, right? So the idea is that we would say, here's an exploit. It's a malicious file. It's a particular severity. There's not a lot of context, let's say, that's relative to the attacker's a tactic or technique, right? So if you didn't say, this is a credential theft that is really trying to run a password stealing Trojan or a password stealing bot or plugin or something, you don't have this full marks, right? You don't get like tactic and technique score. So when you go through the results, keep in mind that that's what those detection categories mean, is that, we didn't surface something, we surface something generally with some context, or we surface something with the full tactic and technique described in it. And so the metrics captured that we sort of counts, right? When you say, okay, well, when you count the detections, what are you counting? The sub-steps are the things you're counting, right? So if you go up there and you see, 28 or 28 plus 7 plus 2, right? This idea that there are 37, the bars that are in there in the graphs that say 37, that's what they mean. So I'm going to just pivot over here to that so you can see what I'm talking about. So if you come to evals.mitre.org, right, and you pick individual and you go to enterprise, that's the last one, and then you flip over to one of the attacks here, Mustang Panda, and then you talk about those tactics and techniques. You can see 28 as techniques defined, tactics defined, and then general, and like we say, none, right? So as you go through the results, you can see each one of the steps that the attacker took. And then when it comes down to these things where it shows, something here and it goes not reported, that's not a bad thing, right? Keep in mind the label we talked about for noise, right? So if somebody's just saying, hey, as part of logging in or as part of looking up, share permissions. I have to go pull Active Directory to find out, what permissions there are on this file share, right? That's just something Windows does by itself, right? So in order to throw, a bunch of false positives our way, the ones that are labeled noise doesn't mean we were producing noise. It meant that MITRE was intentionally throwing up some noise and not reporting it as a positive. Okay, so just, I know it's difficult because there's a lot of double negatives there, and if we didn't report noise, that's a positive, but please interpret the results with that in mind. Liz, maybe now's a good time. Do we want to pull up the poll and see, maybe there's a good, how deep I need to dig on interpreting the results or measuring the competitors. So how did we do?
I'm sharing the results now. You should be able to see them.
Okay. Here we go. All right. So in the results, understanding what was measured was half of the people that responded. Comparing vendors objectively, 3 didn't get as much. Surprised. Most people love to rate each vendor against it, 100 versus 100. Assessing operational impact, 5. Yeah. So, fairly even given the quantity of these results specifically, and I'll flip back to this screen here. You keep in mind that, when you're used to using the product, it probably makes sense to say, oh, okay, I understood what, would I go to this screen? Would I go to the monitor status endpoint screen, or would I simply live in ThreatSync in my day-to-day? Like, would I ever go to this level as an analyst? And so, when you look at other product, which you're maybe not familiar with, this may not be evident. This may not be totally clear. And so one of the ways that I think we can sort of handle how difficult is it to talk about vendor A or vendor B is instead looking at the number of alerts, which if you look for us and say, what would I have actually notified a partner or customer about, an MSP about, it would have been an incident inside of ThreatSync. And then there would have been a drill down process to get to this, right? So let's say for 2 attacks, I would have 2 incidents, which is what happened during our test. All this other detail is there to say, that's not all we see, right? We do have very verbose, very detailed findings about each one of the things that the attacker is doing to show you that we do have very, very deep visibility, but we're not wasting your time by creating a bunch of alerts like other vendors which do that. So when you look at the other consoles, keep that in mind. If you look at other results, that you may be looking at something that they're actually sending you as an alert and not, the incidents that then break down to this. And so when we look at the marks here, finding everything is important, detecting everything is important, alert volume is important, and the legitimacy of the alerting that you're giving people is important. Because if you have to sift through even the noise in this particular test, if you had to look at the noise, it says only 2 legitimate activities. There's a bunch of different noise that would waste your time when you're going through this to try to find out what the attacker is actually doing, especially if it's file operations or something, network connections, and you have to look at every single IP off the machine, and that's very, very cumbersome. Okay, so keep in mind there's the initial run, there's the configuration change run, all part of the same test. So there's 2 tests, detection, protection. We're going to get to the protection one next and show you what those results were as well, right? Keep in mind, can't stress this enough. The detection means that basically all the gloves are off. This is literally us just listening to the attacker behavior and showing you everything we could find. In production, what does that mean? It means that the attacker's probably not getting very far in these attack steps. We're probably quarantining them several steps before they get to play with the operating system like a Scattered Spotter or a Mustang Panda did, right? Even with something like the Zero Trust Application Service, a simple modification like changing code signing or something would immediately make the application untrusted and blocked, right? So there's so many different ways that the test is representative of what we could do in production. And if the attack started in a different place, would we still detect and respond to it? Yes, but it's important to understand that these are a linear progression through the operating system, and detecting it early means we could also obviously turn this into a block earlier, right? Now, in the protection test, 100%, not much to diagnose here in terms of things you should do in production. Shout out to the Zero Trust Application Service. It did pretty much all the lifting here. Every single modification that they had of an application, every attack, I believe, boils down to the misuse of an application, and it's our job just to get between the application and the bad guy. And so on the protection test, on the blocking test, having the zero trust application service really did us a great job here by finding and stopping every modification they made to the operating system. And so you can obviously walk through, look at the production results, find out which steps and sub-steps they tried to run to beat us, but ultimately very similar to the other results, labeled sort of the same. Okay. So that's sort of a deep dive on the results. I'm going to have another question for you guys now. Really, when you review the MITRE results, it's important to us to see, what do you check first? Are we even talking about the thing that between these tests you all are picking to say, what did we really want? Was it really just the visibility? We really wanted, if you can't block what you can't see. So is detection coverage, the most important? Is it this sort of, well, it's great when you detect stuff, but we really just want to know whether or not you stop all the stuff. Could you stop all the attacks? These numbers are great, but in reality, if the attacker was there, I don't care when you blocked them as long as it was before they got my data or encrypted my systems or my credentials or got my credentials. So is the prevention coverage really all we're looking for? Are you trying to operationalize your own SOC? Is the alert volume the first thing you look at to be like, yeah, great, everybody can detect 100% if they put their thing in debug mode. Let's go flip over to the alerts and count, A to B, how many alerts it took Trend Micro to find something that WatchGuard could do and do, right? D, do you look at the legitimacy, the impact on the legitimate activity, right? False positives, right? Maybe you're really bored of clicking through false positives during your triage process. Do you look at, noise or false positive efficiency between the products to say, which one of these would I be happy to work with? And E, do you look at overall efficiency, right? Do you do your own calculation and say, I'm, bring in the MITRE results and I link them to Varus and I say, what was the most important breach, taxonomy that we've seen in the past and link it to this? Do you do something super complicated? So please let me know what you look at first here when you get the MITRE results. What's the most important metric for you when you're digging through these sheets? And Liz will go a couple slides here and then maybe turn back and check back on those results. Okay, let's talk a little bit about our approach, right? Obviously, we don't just make an endpoint product. A lot of the vendors that we're playing around in that sandbox just do, right? They don't really have network technology. They maybe just are making giant acquisitions now to try to bolster their identity product suite. But obviously, the value in the WatchGuard portfolio is that our platform both combines the offensive, the ability to automatically patch vulnerabilities that we find with our EPDR, not just tell you about the vulnerabilities and hope that you can patch them with something else, right? That we try to detect and respond to threats before they get to the endpoint. So everything from network access enforcement to DNS security that's built into the agent to the FireCloud components that are there to block attacks before they get to the endpoint or part of the platform, and to try to do that all autonomously, try to do that as much visibility and as much control as we have, try to do it as automatically as possible so that you don't have to, burden IT with the job of getting involved and coordinating all the, calling balls and strikes across the platform. And so when you look at that and you think of ThreatSync, if you're familiar with our product portfolio, or you think about the other offensive security capabilities of our agent, that kind of rolls into our strategy overall. The reason I say this is because this exam, this test, these results, we're there to try to measure us against the other endpoint players, in our opinion. We could have put our platform into the environment. We could have, taken the entire power of our suite and dropped it in there. But then it would have been a sort of very unrealistic comparison to somebody like CrowdStrike, who has no network protection in their product, or somebody like, a Trend Micro, who, probably only included 2 or 3 components of their stuff to overcome some things that may be there with their endpoint. So if you look at the platform overall and our strategy, of course, it's to make sure that any control point between the application's misuse and the adversary is going to be something that we have as tight a control and as quick a response as possible through the autonomy built into our platform. But this test, of course, only showcased the power of our EDR so that people would say, who are using that product, maybe in isolation, yeah, I have the confidence to know how they would stop a real world APT in my environment just with the endpoint technology that they offer, that of course pairs into things like ThreatSync for better coordination, simpler visibility, and of course the MDR service, which would have taken the AI and human approach to being able to advance our response against the adversary even further, not just boot them out the environment, but maybe make sure they never come back, right? And so the concept here is that those are all things that we have to take into account when you think about the results and what they mean for the community. So Liz, before I dive into this, maybe we could just flip back and say, I'm going to talk about detection visibility. I'm going to talk about protection as AKA blocking. I'm going to talk about operational efficiency. I want to make sure I'm focused on what the audience thinks is the most important thing. So let's pivot back here. Detection coverage was by far the leader. So just understanding how much visibility we have as a vendor is the first and most important metric that everybody looks at when they see this. And I will argue that while it's a great metric, it's slowly becoming table stakes, right? That the idea that this version of ER7, of course, didn't include everybody, did include some modern real world tests. It's still a very valuable exercise to do. And if you're using other vendors or you work with other vendors as partners, I would urge you to ask them to participate in this test. MITRE still is one of the strongest, the most complete, the most broad security frameworks out there. I think there is no comparison. There's nothing else being built. This isn't like compliance frameworks where there's a million, NIST and SANS and CIS and other versions of best practices. There really is only one giant catalog, which is much more difficult to track, of what the adversary is doing in these different environments. And that one place is MITRE. And so, we still think that this is, of course, still the most relevant, the most robust, the most important framework we have for red team, purple team, blue team exercises and communicating how we can stop attacks and our attack efficiency. Of course, we think that it does reflect the real world. Obviously, in the real world, there's a lot more 0 days, right? You're not going to have somebody like MITRE develop very scary brand new attacks that have never been seen before and try to get you doing that. They really want to see how their rolling catalog of things that have been done are being tagged by the community. And so some people may get a little, I want to say dejected or sort of passive about the results and say, yeah, you know what? In a real world scenario, the attacker is going to do very different things. And that's not true. I think that the results are very indicative of what actual attackers do. We have seen these attacks in the MDR service for several years. We have seen these tactics. We have seen these techniques. I have seen DLL sideloading. I have seen them change the code signing to pretend they are semantic when they're not. I have seen that beat, other third-party AVs in my history. And so the idea is that if you look at the concepts here, this is still a very important test to do. It's still very relevant to what's actually going on in the wild. I don't think there's anything more relevant to that. And then I think that as they evolve the test, and more importantly, the results and what they're counting, that the nuance of what it takes to actually find and stop an attack quickly is really going to come to the foreground, especially in the age of AI, when we're going to start talking about different agents and different types of models running your SOC and analysis. The idea that there's a lot of alerts to consume for a person is very cumbersome. But the idea that process really does take a lot of guesswork is also very dangerous, because as you know, a probabilistic model and agent can probably make a lot of decisions that are false, right? That are based on the wrong logic or lying and hallucinating. And so the idea that there is this concept of efficiency where products that are really good at finding an attack and saying very little about it, that is very accurate, helps boost that trust, right? If you are saying a lot about an attack and it is not valuable information and you pass that off to AI, you're going to be in a pretty dangerous spot, because then you're asking it to act on something at scale that it shouldn't, which is a lot of misinformation that these products are producing. And so as MITRE evolves in 7 to give us this visibility into the attackers and efficiency of alerting to turn into operational efficiency, it's very important to be able to grok that. And so I'm going to, in the next slide, show you a version of what we think you could use to try to calculate that. And then, of course, it's helpful that vendors have platforms. I think this is just a platform race. I think it's a race between actually 5 vendors that even have a platform, of which we are one. And that really, the oncoming tests that are saying, yeah, bring anything you've got, I think we should start breaking it out into categories and saying, okay, the network, the identity, the endpoint, the threat intelligence, the sandboxing, they're all playing a role at finding and stopping attacks at scale. And if we're going to run this test hands off, and we're saying, okay, this is really just policy, set it, forget it, this is how the test is run without people behind it, it'd be interesting to see how that platform and AI evolves to say, are we allowed to use an AI assistant? Is the AI assistant allowed to take action? Is that a separate bucket, detection, protection, AI assisted, human assisted response that could be part of this? And they're sort of getting to the edges of that concept today, which is where the modern SOC, I believe, actually is. And so that's why I think that the test results matter. I think obviously in the last sentence, it's probably more room for improvement, but certainly that, the MITRE ATT&CK is still the best framework we have, everybody should play, and that these are very usable results to see how vendors are doing. The more vendors that play, the more you can make purchase decisions based on something like this. But back to the point about efficiency and producing a lot of noise for what will become an autonomous data center powered hopefully by, human and AI together, that may produce actually more risks than rewards. It's very important to understand, if you take the number of alerts that it took us to find the attacker's motivations and block them, and what we brought to the console, what we brought as data back to the cloud, we were very, very, very efficient. Meaning the number of alerts that it took us to find the attack were almost equal to the attack steps, right? So 2 incidents for 28 steps as a drill down with 1 label for each step kind of thing, as opposed to, well, that's almost perfect efficiency. Whereas somebody's saying, okay, there's 97 alerts for 25 steps. And really you could pick one of these 2 alerts to talk about the step, but they were incomplete in terms of the context. That gives you this sort of operational efficiency. A lot of inside baseball, but basically if you're producing too much data to talk about this, it's going to be a risk in the future. And so having the ability to divide the number of steps by the number of alerts that you caught means that the 100% that you show people would obviously, create a downstream effect, a knock-on effect that, you're hoping an analyst would suffer through or AI would suffer through, and neither one of them want that job. So, keep that in mind as we move forward, that efficiency matters. And we are going to be producing a couple more white papers, documentation about this. And we're going to send you those, papers and a package after the call. Third, and don't worry, final question before I get to your questions. I will answer your questions. You don't have to just answer mine. What most affects how useful MITRE results are to you? And when you get these results, I'd love to think of like your visceral immediate reaction when you get them. Is it, oh gosh, I have to go and interpret these? Is it, yeah, why are you not giving me a stacked rating between vendors? I just want to be able to walk into a room with my customers or my boss and say, hey, I bought the best one. You see it's on this piece of paper. Is it that, you need expert help to explain what this even is? They're great results, but you have to explain that it's not a MITRE saw to your friends and family when you're trying to boast about your new endpoint technology. So we'd love to hear your answers here. What most affects how useful the MITRE results are for you, and your usage of them. And I'll give you a few seconds to answer this one because I'm probably not going to circle back after this. I'm just going to go to QA in a few minutes. And so Liz, maybe we stop the poll now. That's a good time. Why not? We'll see. Results. Any results? There we go. Okay. Pretty even split. So maybe I ended it too early before I gave people the time to think and they, panic clicked, but here we go. Lack of clear reading guidelines, pretty even split, 5-5-5. So I think we could do better here. Obviously, MITRE is for people who want to interpret results about how to red team, how to blue team, how to purple team, the different security products, and give you inspiration to say, these are the attacks that matter. Here's a full catalog of them. Choose your own adventure. Adopt this framework and, threat intelligence teams, other people. We want to make sure that when we're communicating the news, IOCs, IOAs, these have all been part of the lexicon for years, to try to get to a standard conversation when we talk about attackers, motives and capabilities to communicate them to each other. So key takeaways. This is sort of the sales slide, so be ready if you're looking to pitch WatchGuard or pitch against us. This is what we think, and I'd love to hear your rebuttals to this because I hear them every day. But so first, this is MITRE validated protection, right? We did stronger this year than any other year, right? We did it for 3 years. It's been around for 7, minus the 1 in 2020, right? The idea is that if you look at these results, this demonstrates a very strong blocking capability in real world attack scenarios. So this isn't like AV test where you're downloading a whole batch of random, executables that you could get from any database. This isn't about, changing techniques so that it's really only this technique or that technique. It's literally a healthy smattering of what's going on in the real world. And this proves that we are matching the strongest market players on endpoint security, even if they're just pure play. This proves our product is as good as, and I would argue better from an efficiency perspective and proactive perspective, at a block rate and detection rate than anybody else. And I will remind everybody that people like Microsoft and Palo Alto Networks and others that did not participate in the test, that are just circulating last year's results because they were too busy or whatever, doesn't demonstrate their commitment to communicating in an open and honest way with their customers and partners the investment they've made in this framework, which will stunt the investment that is happening upstream to analytics providers like SIMS, that will stunt the intelligence and IOC and other information gathering they produce with threat intelligence, because it's not linked to what the rest of the internet is talking about from these results. So real world results from the strongest market players in the field. So yes, the CrowdStrikes and the others that did participate in there, great results, right? This produced another sort of fact finding, which is that we had a clean signal. We allowed people to make faster decisions. We didn't have them look at a bunch of stuff. There was not a tremendous amount of alerts, and we were one of the most efficient EDRs on the market, meaning not only did we block everything and see everything, we also had the most efficient way to look at it, right? And that is something that obviously we are calculating and saying to the team. MITRE is not saying that, but this is something that's very easy to extrapolate from the results based on the number of alerts. And that operational efficiency really will affect scale. Keep in mind, this is true. The number of alerts is true, and this wasn't measured in the test, but this is true of our philosophy around XDR. It's true of our philosophy certainly in MDR, where I came from, is that the more efficiency you can produce for the analyst, the more attacks they can handle, the more complex attacks they can handle, and frankly, the less time and energy it takes to handle those things. So if you're an MSP, that translates to dollars. And if you're a threat analyst, it translates into faster response time. And if you're a researcher, it translates into having to think beyond what a typical cyber attacker would come and put into the environment, and what something scaling up like AI might do to us in the future, right? So building that efficiency now is very critical. It's a critical step to being able to hand over even more automation in our lives. And so operational efficiency here, I can't stress it enough, SOC efficiency, EDR efficiency, they're all part of our key takeaway that we did a really good job there. And that while we didn't measure this, it's important to understand that we do a lot of proactive things to try to stop this from happening before it starts. Reducing threat exposure was not part of the test, but everybody in this call certainly does it on a regular basis. They patch vulnerabilities. They harden systems against cyber attack. They have network security technology to block threats before they get to the endpoint. And that's a critical part of saying, hey, this was great to show how your goalie did in a shootout, but everything we did from a proactive perspective, you have to take into account when you're using these products, because it makes them even better, right? And that platform advantage, being able to do all of that from one place, having, let's say, FireCloud on the agent to be able to block threats before they get to the endpoint, or the same network security technology built into something like DNS Watch, built into the endpoint. Those are the kinds of things that we're still blocking stuff from getting to the endpoint. It's not about going and buying another product like a firewall. It's stuff that's happening on the endpoint that's evolving the EDR. And having that platform advantage, it does make a big difference, right? Especially when you start to say, well, there was a lot of tools in our tool shed. We really only had to use one to beat the protection score, right? But in reality, you're going to use a lot so that you're not just playing the game with the goalie. Don't take my word for it. There is some great customers out there, one of which our partner, Neil at Impact Business, has given us a great recommendation here because he's been using the endpoint security technology for years. This isn't just a fluff test programmed in a lab to teach people that if we configure it this very specific way, we too can get top marks in our latest test. We didn't game it, right? This is a test we run with our hands off the keys, and for people who have their hands on the keys, they can very much see how the endpoint delivers every single day for them. And so making sure that not just the endpoint block rate, but certainly when the alert comes in, it's of high confidence. They're not throwing false positives and interpretations and triage back to the support desk or to their analysts or to their customers. They're not wasting a lot of time back and forth talking about false positives, right? So great little pitch from him. Before I turn it over to questions, I'm going to flip and say, hey, we got another webinar coming up. I have one coming up in 2 days about firewalls, but there's another analyst review of the endpoint product, GigaOM, that we are going to be covering on January 29th. So if you are a total propeller head for endpoint, please use the link here, or get on our website and look at events. You'll be able to see the webinars up there and register for this one coming up on the 29th to discuss those results as well. And spoiler alert, we did really well there too. Okay, I'm going to stop here, stop sharing. I'm not going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I'm going to keep trying to share answers. Maybe let's look at the chat. Is there questions? Here we go. Are there questions coming in? What role did the Zero Trust application service play in WatchGuard's protection score? So it played a very significant role in that it was probably the root cause of what diagnosed and blocked the attacker's misuse of the application, right? So there are millions of signatures in the Zero Trust application service. For those of you who want to Google it and find out, there's a whole bunch of white papers on our website. But the idea is that feature within the endpoint is something that basically will take any executable sort of library inside the operating system that's running, and it will say whether or not this is trusted or untrusted by having an analysis of that be sent to our cloud. It'll diagnose millions of applications based on this logic. We can do other cool things with that logic, like lock down the operating system. So if you're running GoToMeeting, for example, and it changes a DLL, but that a DLL was one of the injected ones, like in the test, of course, that little bit of GoToMeeting that's now changed would be something the Zero Trust application service would kill, because it says this is not how this trusted application is supposed to behave, right? Or this is not a trusted application to begin with. So it played a very significant role at blocking everything for us. In production, it does a really great job. It's beyond human scale. So if you think about millions of things coming into that service and it having sort of these known, unknown, and then passing the unknown off to a team, our team, that can efficiently look through and keep cataloging with them, it's a very, very effective way to block stuff. All right, the next question is, why does Ryder provide only raw data instead of official scores and rankings? Well, if you think about it, it's kind of like, it's not the Olympics, right? We're not looking for a gold, bronze, and silver medal necessarily. The community might, and certainly you can take a detection score of 100% and a prevention score of 100% between two vendors and then say, what now? Is it a tie? And so you probably look at something like efficiency and say, well, how many alerts did it take to get those detections? What's it like to use this product in production? What story does this play as part of a larger platform, perhaps, that sort of informs some of the decision? So maybe there's like, if you didn't get at least 100% on MITRE, I don't want you in the discussion in your next RFP. And that could be defining winners and losers. But MITRE as an organization, keep in mind, is trying to get vendors to participate. They're trying to get them to say, hey, we want to know what you're good at finding, what you're not good at finding. Why are these attacks succeeding in the first place? When they catalog, when they pick these threat actors, they're very curious as an organization in analyzing what's successful from the bad guys. And so if they don't have a wide participation of people coming in and saying, like, let's go in, be totally open about what we can find and what we can't, that's it. If you're competing for a prize, there's a motive there, right? I, like everybody, want to win. I'm sure everybody on this call wants to win, right? Because it's part of your survival in business is to make sure that you get dollars by being the best and winning. But the idea is that MITRE is not a place to try to rank them. For example, it would be sort of an unfair test for in one capacity to say, like, my protection store is always going to kick the crap out of everybody, because they actually have to turn on features or product or configuration to be able to stop something. And another product might come in and be like, I've got a 3-dimensional dashboard that can allow me to scroll through visibility for hours. So my visibility is just so amazing. And then, like many other analysis, if they say, here's the criteria it takes to win, well, now we start gaming our products towards the win instead of towards the adversary, which is what we're all trying to do here, right? So I think that it's hard for MITRE to get in the way, maintain participation, maintain participation from the wider community and from you guys if they're saying it's a winner. If there's winners and losers, it corrupts, I think, what they're trying to do as an organization. Though certainly you'll see a lot of vendors go out and say, we're the #1. No one is the #1. If you see the word #1 on a page, you know they're trying to confuse you. And the fact is, you can pull up 2 papers that probably say #1 and be like, well, how are you all not talking to each other? Because it both seems like you got different results. So there are no winners, there are no losers, but there is ways to interpret, to look for the visibility, the control, and the efficiency and the automation in the products. Okay, MITRE ATT&CK evaluations are scenario driven. And our scenario, oh, okay, well, I think this is a typed out answer. And this was to the question, sorry, why does not applicable on so many results and does it matter? Yeah, it's the test you set up for, right? So we don't have infinite time in the world. We didn't sign up for everything of the tests we did sign up for. I think we participated in the 2 scenarios, Windows and Mac. And that's how we did it this year because we wanted to showcase the endpoint. Were there cloud scenarios where we could have hooked in XDR or something else? Probably. You know, I'm not gonna pretend that we don't have a capability to go in and shim in other product there. But this year we wanted to have people focus on our endpoint, on the success of our endpoint, on the capabilities of our endpoint. We're really proud of it. It did really, really well, and we wanted to showcase that without muddying the water for partners on, oh yeah, well, if we plugged in XDR, or, you know, we had our MDR team behind it, you know, with the AI, if we had cloud detections piped in through ThreatSync or something, that we would do, you know, even better, right? Or have more results to show, right? Cloud specific test or something else we might do in the future. But today's tests and the results, ER7, were about the endpoint. It's been about the endpoint for a long time, and we didn't want to let that go without showing up with just the endpoint and showing what it is. I didn't want anybody to have excuses either. None of us wanted excuses either of why the endpoint, you know, wasn't enough, right? It isn't. It was by itself. There's no contest. It did really well. All right, with 2 minutes to go, if there are any other questions, type them in now. Anything from where'd you get the wood to make your shelf to where'd you get that blazer maybe? No? All right. Well, we hope to see you on the next webinar. I have one coming up in a couple days. Don't forget about the GigaOM one on January 29. Any questions we didn't get to or answer, you know, or you didn't think to ask, sorry, and we can get to and answer them later. Feel free to reach out, and we'll do our best to get them answered for you. Thanks so much for participating today. We really appreciate it.